Right. Hello, everyone. I think I'm supposed to just start. I haven't been told to just. I've got the thumbs up from Alan. That'll do. Before we start, found this. Looks like an iPhone in a nice case in the room at some point today. If anyone is missing an iPhone in a nice case,
I would like one. Yeah.
Or is it a power bank? It looks like an iPhone. It shows what I know. No, yeah, you're right. It's a. Anyway, if anyone needs a, if anyone's lost a power bank, it's there. It's not an iPhone. Don't all get up. It's not an iPhone. Right. Okay. So this panel is on the industry perspective, and I'm going to say right off the bat that we're quite low in industry perspectives in the audience and attendees today. So we have people who are not of universities on the panel. I am not of industry. I'm going to say that straight away because I'm just chairing, so that's okay. And I think the intention of this panel is to recognise that DRI roles are not limited to those in academia. It's everything from national security through to product development, other advanced computational technologies, other places where computation and software development is undertaken, could all be thought of as being in the DRI space. So without further ado, I'll ask the panel to introduce themselves, and I'll start at this end.
Yeah. So, hi. Is that working? I don't know. But yeah, hi. I'm Sarah. So I actually work for STFC. I'm part of the team that run the Daphne platform. So I work for STFC, so not at a university, so kind of maybe straddling the line, but listening to everyone talk about working at a university maybe fit more towards the industry end. But so yeah, I'm a software engineer, so I'm mainly sort of system facing with a little bit of our user facing, and we run a research platform for infrastructure researchers. So we build and maintain the platform, we talk to them, ask them what they want, we add new features to it as best we can, and we're hoping to look at having some non-academic users in the future, but there's some hurdles we have to but yeah, so that's who I am.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Hogan. I'm a senior scientific software engineer at the Met Office. I am an astronomer by trade. I did a PhD in astronomy and worked on astronomical data reduction software for 6 years in Chile before deciding I wanted to move back to the UK. And since astronomy jobs are hard to come by in the UK, I ended up at the Met Office, where I now help climate scientists process their data instead of astronomers. So.
Hi everybody, I'm James Earl Fraser, Head of Research and Innovation Sector Development at JISC. I can talk more about what JISC does and why it might sit on this panel maybe as we go through it, but we provide some digital research infrastructure in the communication network layer of Janet, so we're a DRI provider ourselves. My role particularly, though, probably looks a lot about how we are using that infrastructure to support the innovation side of the research and innovation ecosystem. So I have a lot of partners who interact with all of you or most of you at universities about how you're using our services. I operate a lot more with, in addition to people kind of here in kind of UKRI and public sector research establishments, also how industry and commercial entities utilize DRI. And also just does some negotiating with industry. We use industry partners, so there might be a few ways we can take the conversation.
Hi, I'm Phil Harrison. I was asked to join this panel at the very last minute. So I was here talking about my current job last time, and I'm going to kind of wind the clock back about 2 and a bit years to my previous role, which was working in a forensic lab, kind of mainly doing forensic expert work and giving evidence in court, but also kind of running the whole IT infrastructure for the company and collaborating with the university on research projects, and also kind of developing in-house tools for the practitioners and myself as well as I was going through. So a bit of kind of almost that foot in both camps that we were talking about previously of being a nice mix. I kind of had that, not 50-50, maybe 90-10 split. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from on this panel.
Hi, I'm Sam Bland, and I'm an embedded RSC at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and also have the hat of the N8 CIR head of RSC, the RSC theme. Going back quite a few years, like many DRI professionals, I didn't know what one was. I never really thought about it being a DRI professional until I was one. Even when I was one, I didn't know what an RSC was until a few years in, and then I found out what an RSC was, and I was like, oh, that's me. And there was a community there. But going back quite a few years, I started my career as a trainee architect in the construction industry. That's buildings, not technical architecture. And I found I was spending a lot of time actually using computers to resolve issues that my kind of higher ups had no idea could be solved with computers. That saved me a lot of time. Sometimes I did have to admit that I used that. But I found that was, I was more interested in the computer side. I spent a few years playing around with different things, but got into CGI, that kind of thing. A few economic crashes later, I thought it was time to go back and do my master's. And then so I went back to do my master's thinking, right, it's time to actually be an architect again. And again, I got sucked into software and ended up doing urban modeling. That got me into kind of the importance of high performance computers and the kind of limits of what we can do with computers. I then took another sidestep and decided to be an entrepreneur. That was challenging. One pandemic and another economic collapse later, I took on the job at York, where I have been since, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone online on the panel? No. Okay, right, excellent. So that's us. So I'm going to try and sort of I've got some questions. I'm going to try and sort of choose reasonable questions for the panel. I think I'd like to start with I think one which would be a good icebreaker is what experience do members of the panel have with working with commercial industry partners, and what have the benefits and challenges of these partnerships been? And going to start at the far end, if that's okay. So
yeah, so I think there's a few ways I could view this, but one way we've looked at is actually in bringing in external contractors or research and software engineers that are working on perhaps a consultancy basis, or they are employed from outside of the university, and we found this to be kind of quite useful, I guess. There's the challenge of sorry, I'm not sure where I'm going with that now. But there's kind of a value there of having people that have that experience of working in an industry area where they've got those frameworks in place, they've kind of worked on a product right through to completion, they've worked with a product that has to have that longevity and that kind of that value for all the users and that kind of thing. And I think that was a value addition to our project.
I feel like the main difference is the kind of constraints or different motivations. I think actually not thinking back to where I was, but a project that we're working on at the moment with an external partner. They're providing a software tool to us, which we as a group couldn't kind of create from the ground up, but I guess they have more issues. I think we were talking about the kind of failures or mistakes options. We're using their commercial product in a kind of interesting and different way. So whilst they're kind of fully on board with it, we have kind of some sensitivities to how we're using their product. They're giving us a lot, and we have a good relationship with them, so there's perhaps sensitivities there that you might not otherwise have if you were just in a purely research environment, just using your own code or some open source code. So I think that's something that we're needing to kind of just be aware of. I don't feel like they're not putting any limitations on us. but just a different set of sensitivities maybe.
Yeah, so I heard you say constraints early on in your answer there, and it made me think back to earlier today where academic freedom was mentioned. I guess that's, I mean, you referring back to the fact that, you know, research, as DRI professionals, we may be working with and for researchers who perhaps don't have the sorts of constraints that a commercial entity may have.
I think, yeah, I was kind of thinking of answering one bit in a first way. I think the constraints came more when I was working at the forensic lab, and that we were primarily a business driven to deliver a service, and the research that we were able to do was a kind of a nice to have that we want to drive the field on, but we're still a commercial entity, so the time that was allotted for that was very, I guess, elastic, and often felt like it was being reduced, or even if there was things that my colleagues were like, oh, basically we had a bit of standard off-the-shelf open source software that I'd modified to be able to increase throughput, automate lots of bits of work, and colleagues would be, oh, it would be nice if we could have this, or nice if we could have that, but I also had my kind of fee-earning day job to do. So in a academic setting, there's not those same pressures necessarily to be, you have to do this as your day job, whereas like, well, no, this is my day job now. This was the kind of the nice to have additions, but there's this police officer, this barrister phoning up going, we need this report now, so you can't work on what you might want to work on, or what I definitely kind of towards the end felt was the more enjoyable parts for me.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. James?
So I have a couple thoughts in this space, and it will allow me to give a potted history of JISC as a whole. So for those who don't know JISC, we started to mention, so we're kind of part of the DRI landscape by providing one of those foundational tools of the networking of JANET, Joint Academic Network. On top of that, we build some cybersecurity, definitely on the back end of that, and then support individual institutions with cybersecurity and the kind of authentication environments for single sign-on or EduRoam, or some of the things that you actually might see as people logging into stuff. We also do a lot of brokerage, collective negotiating on behalf of the sector. I'll come back to that in a moment. JISC has existed for about 40 years, which makes us probably as old as kind of the most modern universities. But as a research and technology organization, makes us kind of old, and we've gone through some maturity phases. We used to, back at the beginning, fund stuff. We were like one of the other research councils. We would give mainly universities crops of money to build stuff, build out a network, build out a technology that's needed in the research and education space. And then somewhere along the line, we turned to taking that kind of back in-house, and then we started to build stuff, and we built stuff that was in and of the sector. We went through this whole period for about a decade in the noughties into the mid-teens of co-designing everything with the sector, without much industry involvement, without kind of thinking to the broader private market, thinking we really did need our own version of what was needed for the community. But over the last 5 to 10 years, we've really changed again to doing a lot more partnering with industry, negotiating with industry, enabling the tool sets and the products that are actually helping to build the DRI facilities and infrastructures, as well as just institution level activities, helping you to enable and kind of advising on the best way to use them. So we're not really building stuff anymore, and we're also not looking to institutions to do it anymore. So we have, maybe without us actually purposely thinking about it that much, turned into an organization that's constantly interfacing with industry. And I have to imagine those in the room who actually have to buy and build their own DRI kit is also doing this constantly. You're negotiating, you're figuring out where they're sitting along with you. So we build everything that we do now pretty much in a partnership model. So we're going to have, you know, a Juniper or a Cisco or a Sienna or a Splunk or a Fortinet or someone who's actually providing the industry kit that we're trying to spec to the specific requirements that we see out there in the sector. To a lot of those same actors, and increasingly out to the software providers, we're also trying to represent the sector as a whole in collective negotiating. So what we see is there's often a lot of good intentions from all these suppliers early on in education or research rates or collaborative efforts, especially when they don't have much of a foothold in the sector or much value they can get out of it. And then that changes at some point when they see a lot of value out of you or you're really sunk into it. And we've particularly developed up a big licensing brokerage house with publishers because a lot of the outputs, and especially the open access and open research agenda tied into that output requirement is tied back into publisher license fees and the like. But over the past few years, we've started to develop up more in the research software space. I would say it's still not super mature. A lot of them are only the very high-level suppliers and things that you'd be used to that actually cut across enterprise and research, like Microsoft licensing. But we're looking to probably work with this community a lot more on how to come up with a bit of a definition of how does the community have expectations of industry, whether they're a license provider or some other element of a provider, that by collectively having red lines as a sector, we can support a more stable footing for everyone. Last thought in that space is that actually then when you turn to utilizing a lot of that infrastructure, whether it has a frame of coming through us or you just directly with them, I think what we see quite a lot is you are having to turn back to those industry providers to help train up yourself in the maturity, either because of a lack of expertise in your own team or just because of the reality that if you're trying to move workflows to an enterprise cloud environment, it's the enterprise cloud provider who actually has the understanding of how you would optimize that on that kind of environment. So there is a bit of a, hardball in some places, but then it does really have to be a partnership. And I think there's a session later on Friday or something where you're talking about partnership with that. So I'm kind of tipping into that a bit, but I think we definitely see that across the stack of industry engagement.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the licensing issue and the fact that we are, well, those of us who are at universities are obviously working at non-profits, but they are £1 billion turnover non-profits, and so I can well imagine that the likes of Microsoft have an odd time squaring that circle in terms of discounts.
Yes. Yeah.
Emma.
Thanks. So yeah, at the Met Office, I guess our DRI professionals are kind of spread across different areas. So most of the RSEs at the Met Office are within our science profession. And I keep trying to think like who we interact with like on the industry side, and I'm just drawing a complete blank because what I'm thinking about is our like Met Office academic partnership, which is our partnership with universities. Like that's the only thing I can think of from like the science side of things. With regards to, I guess, our technology side and our supercomputer and our interactions with Microsoft, like that's all kind of done in a different area with some overlap. But yeah, so a lot of what we do kind of on the science side are interactions with universities rather than other industries.
Yeah, I suppose perhaps more the Met Office. I mean, to me, and just my view, but my natural inclination is to view the Met Office as at least slightly more industrialised than universities, in the sense that I guess you have a particular. I'll call it a niche. It's probably wider than a niche, but you have a particular area that you're involved in, and you do have lots of industry customers, don't you?
Yes, that's
true. You are providing products in that sense, which I think is less common in academia.
Okay.
But I'm trying to think how to word this. Does the commercial imperative ever impact or impinge on the science in any way, or does it ever encroach?
That's a good question. So I guess I work in a space where I don't deliver to customers. Right. Like there are obviously there's many areas across the Met Office and many people providing products and services to industry customers. Unfortunately, I'm not one of them. But yeah, I guess it's more of a yeah, it's providing that service. Like we were talking a lot about kind of collaborations, and that's kind of where my brain is, and it's like how we collaborate with industry. But I guess I'm not seeing that, I guess, because I see us delivering products and services, but it's not in a collaborative way, I guess. Yeah, sorry, I can't comment more on that.
No, not at all. This is a panel on the edge of industry and academia, and so you know this is a fuzzy area, and you know I think all perspectives are really useful and nothing to apologise for. Sarah.
Yeah, so we're maybe facing quite an interesting challenge, but hopefully not a unique challenge at the moment. So yeah, the platform I work on is for data and analytics for national infrastructure. So initially we were funded with the idea that our users were all going to be sort of researchers from universities. So it's free to use for those researchers, and has been sort of since it started. But sort of over time, over the last few years, we've had sort of research projects that have spanned outside of universities to like other entities that are more commercial, which is excellent. And then we have these users who have access, and they're like, oh, actually, we'd be quite interested in using your platform, but for other things that are not part of this research package. And we've kind of hit this point now where we were never really set up for commercial users, and we're now sort of having to retroactively figure out how we now go back and sort of kind of do things we need to do, such as resource accounting, which we sadly don't do at all at the moment, to figure out, you know, yes, it would be okay if these commercial, like industry people used our platform, but we kind of need them to pay for it because our funding is based on it being research being done that's, you know, going to be published at the end. And so we've hit quite a few interesting challenges sort of in the last year of having to retroactively go back and figure out, you know, we have this whole system, how do we now go back and sort of do all of this accounting, and we have no idea how much compute people have historically used for anything. So we have to work from zero, and you know, we want commercial industry people to be able to use the platform. It's there, and it's just about ready for it. But we can't, because we don't have enough data. We don't have a way of like sort of setting up, you know, costing models. Like, we're not really ready for the industrial world, even though they're here and already using the platform for things they're not really meant to be using it for. And you know, and it's great that we've moved from it being just for research to being something that industry people would want to use, but we're like awkwardly very on the edge, and maybe some of our hardware is a bit behind, and we don't have the capacity to get it going. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
So data collection in terms of then knowing actually how much to charge industry,
Yeah.
and obviously you don't want to come out too cheap, because
Yeah.
you'll be. What about things like? I mean, one of the things that so over the years, every so often, I've had this sort of wide-eyed, naive idea that we should do more stuff with industry, and someone with a lot more experience than me comes on and puts their hand on my shoulder and says, you know, you really want to get the legals sorted out before you start allowing people to build their business on the services you provide. I mean, is that something as well that you're dealing with in your transition?
No, not so much. So it's more, so right now, the industry people I'm thinking of are more like government departments who have been sort of partnering up on research things. So it's more like they're just sort of, they're not building their whole business on it, but they want to use the systems we have, especially because we have people who already know how to use the system and they're like used to it. And my colleague's got her hand up over there.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, Sarah ended up on this panel instead of me, but I, decided to butt in. Yeah, I think we definitely are starting to have more conversations about downtime, and whether they're mainly partners with universities, and we're working with the universities, but whether we need to be able to guarantee that we're up for certain amounts of time, and those conversations are now coming up more. I think the other area that's coming up more is data security, and I mean, it's true in certain academic areas as well, but is noticeably true for us, that the more we talk to industrial partners, the more we're having to worry about who can see their data, like can our developers see their data, and that not being okay anymore. The like hurdle of security in terms of data access is becoming a much bigger one.
Because
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to follow up and say, having it only be researchers using our platform, they are much more amenable to us saying, we're going to do a release today, and then the platform going down for 6 hours, because they're, I think that came up maybe this morning, maybe yesterday, we were talking about how, like, there's much more room to make mistakes when you're working in academia, and when you shift over to industry, like, if you've got more of a business and they're paying to use it, you imagine that they'd be much less happy with it just going down for 6 hours because something was wrong in our database. So.
And I think to pick up on something you said, sorry, I missed your name. You're talking about like who can see the data and that sort of thing. I mean, I remember going back to the CSAR days in Manchester. We had a commercial organisation wanted to use the service, but they absolutely did not want anyone else to know they were using it. All we knew was they were an F1 team, but they were going to do some stuff and they didn't want to know who it was. Anyway, anyone who went onto the machine and listed all the processes running could see all these processes running, and it was called Williams F1. So there we go. And I think we're over 20 years in talking history, so I think that's all right to say. Okay, so thanks all. So I think a good question to sort of ask, because I think the panel can choose which direction they answer this from, is what are we good at in academia that industry can take from us, and what are we not good at academia that industry could teach us? And I think I'll start this end this time, if you don't mind, and you can choose whether you want to which way you want to go with that one.
I don't know which way this goes, but I can think more of like a situation we have at the moment that's quite interesting. So I guess, okay, I don't know which half this falls into. We'll figure it out at the end. But so we have lots of big dreams about what we want our platform to be able to do, and we only have so much development effort to make our platform better. And we've entered a bit of a time recently where it's maybe hard to prioritise what is most important for that. Because we sort of straddle the line between academia and industry, I don't know whether we do it more like industry or more like academia, but we get written into sort of grants off. So like people are saying, they're going to use our platform, and then once they've been given that money, they say, we've said we're going to be able to do that on your platform, and it's too late, and we have to make our platform be able to do what they've said it's going to be able to do, and it sort of it takes away from sort of anything else that we're trying to do. And so I don't know whether that's more like academia or more like industry, but it would be lovely to have the requirements.
That sounds like academia are bad at knowing what their requirements are up front, and then putting the load on you when they haven't got it quite right.
Yeah. So whichever way we want to learn from it, we'd love to know sort of before we're told that we should be able to provide something that we can't provide. Would be nice, yeah.
So I've got, I think, 2 examples. So for what academia does well that I think we sort of do at the Met Office, but I'd like to kind of know more about. But I think at universities, it's quite common for there to be this kind of core RSE group, and like people kind of say, hey, I've got some money to work on a thing, and then RSEs go out and work on a thing. And I guess at the Met Office, pretty much all of our RSEs are hired to work on a specific thing, on a specific project, in a specific team. We have one small group of RSEs that do get deployed to other teams, but that's funded by the Excalibur project, and so it's only for specific work packages that they can be deployed to. We're kind of looking to generalise that, but it feels like it's a model that I'm interested to learn more about, because I guess our positions are kind of team based, and it's just interesting to hear that that's how it works at universities. So that's kind of like one thing that I feel like the ability to kind of respond to things that are happening. We've got this project that needs doing, and we need RSEs on it. The ability to have people who can just move into that project and do that work. Whereas we don't have that flexibility with the 130 RSEs that we have at the Met Office. Then on the other side, I think the one thing that the Met Office does have that a lot of universities, I think, maybe don't have quite in the same way is our kind of like progressions and like skills frameworks. And so we have like a clear skills framework, we have progression, we have levels of RSEs, kind of through foundation all the way to expert and then beyond. And so, I don't know whether that's kind of something I feel like we do well. Those were the two that immediately jumped into my head.
I think that sort of having, it feels like that sort of having defined paths in certain industry. I'm thinking of like biggies as well, like IBM, who you can become a scientific fellow or whatever the term is, but and so on. Okay, that's really interesting. You've got that. So James, academia, good, bad.
So I'll start kind of on the bad, but actually of just validating what Sarah and Esther were saying about industry starting to creep in and a bit change the requirements. Totally agree. Very problematic to go from the very open academic structure that exists, that's not going to include service level agreements, that's not going to particularly include commitments to uptime, that probably has some good data security components, but maybe not always cataloged or explained in an excellent way. It's just apples and oranges. But whether you're a institution or facility that's actively coveting or courting, that'd be the right word, courting industry or non-traditional users, the sector seems to be moving in a way where the activity, and particularly the facilities enabling the research and innovation activities, are just more and more of a mixed environment over time. I have a shorter time horizon than many of you in the room, but it seems like at least over the last decade, that kind of line between what's a government entity, what's an academic entity, what's a charitable entity, what's a private industry entity, you're often getting public monies going into groups that involve all of them. And that includes then use of the facilities that are public facilities. So actually meeting all of their requirements in some way, or at least understanding how you're engaging with them, is probably going to be a part of what all of us have to deal with in the way that Daphne is dealing with it now. And certainly we deal with it a little bit at JISC. What we do probably do really well, and at JISC, definitely Janet has private users in the research space, and we've had to kind of tune up how we could have. We don't offer SLAs. We don't offer anything in particular that a university wouldn't receive from us, but we try to provide assurance documentation to support those kinds of users. But what we find as feedback is that generally our approach of taking some enabling technologies, this obviously isn't a JISC thing, this is a DRI thing, but taking some enabling technologies and having an approach that really wants to look deeply at a problem and work flexibly towards a problem, which I think is kind of exactly what you were saying with the Met Office. We always seem to have a lot of appreciation from industry users who like that we don't just bring an application approach to whatever their problem set is. There will actually be a lot of exchange and working through and A/B testing and figuring out exactly how you can use the infrastructure to support what that specific industry provider is trying to achieve. Yeah, how well that translates into contracts, it's not very direct, but there does seem to be a lot of appreciation that academia brings a different approach to those problems in industry.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was just thinking while you were talking, it'd be interesting to think about the different scenarios where it's, because clearly sometimes universities want to go out to industry to do the collaboration. Sometimes industry want to go to universities. It can be a different, the pull can be in either direction, can't it, in some ways? And
Yeah.
that's where the differences in, you say industry might want to partner with a university specifically for that more problem-solving approach. Yeah.
And usually, at least on the digital infrastructure side, what we often see is that the industry partner ends up having the louder voice. I mean, obviously, if it's the kind of situation where they're coming to you and want to use your facility, you have more pull. But we've been trying to work with industry collaborative partnerships with universities to understand what is the best practice for how data is held, how it's transferred between places. Obviously, it starts to wrap into TRE environments and the like. In most cases, usually the industry really dictates that, and I don't know if that's actually particularly good. It's just a matter of, it seems like every university and every partner is kind of making it up on their own as they go, because it's just not a standardized approach that the sector knows how to deal with.
Yeah, I definitely see that. Philip?
I guess it's not strictly a DRI situation that I wanted to talk about, but a kind of more research situation in general, actually rooted in a real project that I'm working in and kind of carried over from, well, it's a forensic project and carried over from my experience in the forensic lab and the field in general. That I think what we can bring from the academic side is, I think we were talking again before, the ability to take risks and also the sort of scale and time. So the specific issue in the forensic field is accreditation of or validation methods, and trying to do that from within a commercial context, whilst what I was saying before, you've got these time pressures of we've got to bring money in, we want to do this, we're being kind of forced by regulation to do this, but trying to do that and do the day job at the same time is nigh on impossible. But the university situation has, we can say we want a pot of money to do this as a research project, but we can then drive that, shape that in partnership with industry to turn that into a useful output that isn't just, oh, a nice bit of blue sky academic research that's, well, we think it's interesting and fun, but by doing it in collaboration and partnership, we're able to get the insights to shape that piece of work so it's actually got huge maximal benefit, maximal impact from the time that we're doing, because we're spending the time that the practitioners, the commercial world can't do.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we're taking that risk to some extent. We're getting the benefit from that collaboration. You're still keeping people happy by ticking the ref boxes and all the rest of it, but bringing in a kind of almost a broader expertise as well, and having access to some of the DRI stuff that maybe smaller companies wouldn't have as well. So I think it's maybe, say there's a panel on collaboration, it's kind of more answering to that, but I think there's definite benefits from bringing the two together, and it's almost seems kind of a no-brainer in lots of respects, but there are all the issues with contracts and data protection and all of those things, but hopefully it can be pitched in ways that isn't as much of a barrier, or it's like, well, yes, we have to do this, and we'll deal with it, we'll find ways to make it work, but everyone is ultimately better off from the collaboration and people trying to do the same thing but separately.
It's interestingly brought up impact and ref there, because I think increasingly getting things out into industry and accepted by industry, that's impact, and I think that's a change perhaps over the last couple of 20 years or so in my experience. It used to be, you could I've never been an academic, but you could see that the academic track was very much more get funding in, write loads of papers, get loads of citations, and I'm not saying the rest takes care of itself and it's more complicated than that, but now people are looking for impact, and citations is our form of impact, but a commercial company taking something up and building a product on it, that's always orders of magnitude more impact, and I think we obviously need industry to get that impact. So, yeah.
I think it touches back on some of the other things that we've been talking about as well, the sort of letters of support of saying, well, this is actually a research project that has real world impact, or the people putting this funding bid together have gone out and spoken to industry and have checked that actually, is this going to be of value? Are we doing it the right way? And also the point I was making on the last panel about networking, a lot of these collaborations are with, I mean, it's a small community, but I guess most communities are small in the end when you boil it down to it, but working with people that we know who are trusted people, that we've been at conferences together, we've had other small discussions or whatever, it's a much nicer environment to work in as well if these are people that you know and trust and that you can have kind of open and frank discussions with as well, and it's not then a kind of us and them, and are we giving things away. So just being at events where there are academia and industry and forging those relationships goes a long way. So these are people that we're having this collaboration with, that I've worked for or kind of known for 20 years in the forensic context, and I'm now working with them in academia, and it makes for a more, I guess, vibrant and open, and everyone knows each other, and we're all kind of pushing in the same direction.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to come to Sam in a sec, but just to say I'm going to come out to the audience after Sam's answer, so start thinking of the questions you'd like to ask of the panel. So, Sam.
I'm going to sort of step back a little bit to where James left off on standards. And coming from architectural design, there's quite a lot of pressure to have quite heavy top-down standards for things. Those at the top are really taking the liability. It's not just a software project. People's lives, as we know, are at risk. They really need to know that everyone's following that standard and that the outputs are kind of accepted and accountable right up at that top level. I then went into kind of CGI, where on projects that they were basically week-long projects, and you had to standardise that process to be able to get something in and out in that short time. So I'd kind of been driven down this very much efficiency standard kind of approach. That then went into academia, and it was just a massive shock to the system. I sort of take on a project, and it's like, well, which language do I need to use? What's everyone else using? Or where does it need to go out to? Or what are the standards we need to meet? And there was kind of nothing there. And I think that links very much back to this kind of idea of academic freedom. And it's kind of great on one perspective, because it means you can go off in any direction you like. You can really build your own career and your own way of working. I think somewhere where that's starting to become a bit sticky is we're starting to face the issues that industry is facing with things like security. And when you don't have that standard in place, then that becomes much more difficult to work with.
Yeah, I think the interface of the standards is a really interesting one. I mean, it's something that's certainly academia has probably had to take more notice of again over the last couple of decades than before. You know, there's certainly a level at which I think I've seen standards come out of academia, but then the number of standards that we have to make sure we comply with as well. I mean, as an RSE team, you know, we now have to can't just sometimes write software in the medical space. We've got to have it certified as a medical device. You know, you can't. You know, there's all this. I think it's an interesting thing that lots of projects are having to deal with, whereas they could have stayed a lot more on the side of the blue sky research. They're having to go further into the standardisation space. Is that something you recognise?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's, as this kind of boundary between the kind of blue sky academic outputs and starting to become more kind of industry and commercial output kind of linkages, then you do end up with that kind of, particularly in the NHS space, where these things they're very cutting edge technology, but at the same time they have to meet some quite sometimes ancient standards and ancient requirements, and that interface is I hear quite difficult. That's something I've had experience.
You can get I was going to say get away with, probably not the right term phrase, but I can only think of that now. You can get away with a lot more in a controlled study than you can in the actual space where you're treating patients, and there is quite a big difference. Yeah. So I'll put it. Oh, got some hands. With the mic's coming. If we start with the gentleman in the hat, if we may. I'll come to you, Emma, after that.
Yeah, a central theme in my view that touches almost in every aspect that we addressed yesterday, today, and ongoing. It's the concept of free service at the point of use. I want to ask the panel and also other senior stakeholders among us now, what is the weight you place on designing, operating, or facilitating a new system? I mean, a free service at the point of use, to me, looks like the best incentive to attract new people on the job, provide opportunities to people to engage in our trade or in any other job, actually. So what weight does this comes to you as academics, our profession, industry, and no corporate representative over here? What I'm saying is that I expect 2.5 answers and no comment for the absent people, because even if they were here, they wouldn't comment. So what's free service at the point of use having to do with your decisions? For me, it was the entry to this world, actually, because back then, you can guess my age, to get an access to computing systems was almost unthinkable, and the wealth of resources was paramount. Thank you.
So the balance between free at point of use and how do you balance that, sustain it?
I think it's something that really differentiates academia from industry, and that we can offer that, we can give that opportunity to a lot of people, which means that we've discussed this idea of RSCs and other DRI professionals picking up the skills in a university where we've got that easy access and that kind of low friction access, and then going off into industry. A kind of small point to counter that is, having worked in the commercial sector, there's a general rule of thumb that your 20% of the low 20% of income clients will probably give the 80% of complaints, essentially. And I think that comes across in a few things that are kind of free to attend. I hope that doesn't impact the DRI, which has been free, but you do get that issue sometimes.
Would anyone else on the panel like to tackle that one? James, you look like you've got an answer.
It's definitely not an answer. So I think I agree with the concept of what you're saying, that is, especially in the academic space, and especially with access to these kinds of facilities, free at the point of use is the model that helps us to attract the widest audience. I think free at the point of use now, probably for all of us as institutions, requires a lot of business model jujitsu in the background to still make it feel free at the point of use. And probably different institutions go about that in different ways. I know JISC has a very convoluted business model and subscription model with institutions that is mainly predicated on the idea that we don't want any of the infrastructure we deliver to hamper the science use case or the teaching use cases that's delivered from both of that. That means we over-provision to a wide extent so it feels free at the point of use for everyone who needs to use it. But there is a very complex business model, both with our funders as well as the buyer institutions, to be able to facilitate that. And it feels like over time, as we bring in more industry into use of all these kinds of facilities, as we have more nailed down business models, as the money gets tighter as a whole for all of us as organizations, it's getting harder and harder, or at least you're really, really counting the pennies for every element of that business case. And I wonder if that will have knock-on effects for feeling how easy these things are to access.
Sorry?
Yeah, I mean, speaking specifically of the service I work on, like, if you can justify using it to us, then it's free. But then there is sort of, it's got to be funded from somewhere, right? Like people who work on it have got to be paid, and you've got to buy all your hardware. So like, I do agree again, like with the concept of like free at the point of use. You want people to be able to use the software they sort of need, but it kind of has to come with the expectation that there's going to be something coming out of it at the end. Like, yes, if you're a researcher and you tell us this brilliant research you want to do on our service, then yeah, it's free, you can come and do it. But we do kind of expect to see results at the end. So I guess free with some strings attached.
Well, I
It's
think
most of academia, isn't it?
so free at the point of use is the key phrase there, because it's not free. Someone's paying for it somewhere.
Yeah.
We maintain a raft of systems at Manchester which researchers can buy into, with their grant money. But there's usually a free tier as well. And by free, I mean the university funds it centrally to some level. It's not free. It's and we, like you say, we expect people using the free at point of use tier to be working towards something which is perhaps bigger and might go into a grant, and therefore they'll come back. The first hit is free, and then you come back and you pay us afterwards. So, would anyone else from the panel like to tackle that question or follow up? Or otherwise I'll go to another question.
I think it's important to remember that if it's free at the point of use, you are offsetting the person that is trying to kind of bid for that resource. So if you're bidding for a computer for your project, you have, it's your responsibility then to make the pitch for why it's worth it. Whereas if you're expecting that resource to be free, somebody else is pitching on your behalf, essentially. So it's kind of that, it's making sure that if you want that service, even though it's free, you still need to be able to feed back into these services to say it was valuable to me, so that those services then have the opportunity to pitch for you in the future.
I think also this takes it in a slightly different direction, so don't need to harp on it, but I think whether you're talking about free in this kind of model or some sort of other model where people are choosing by pitching or buying or something, you do need to build in the EDI concept of actually who's getting access, because free at the point of use could mean those who are really loud and established get to use it as much as they want.
Yeah, and actually that's something we're tackling or trying to be more aware of at Manchester right now. So Emma, you had your hand up.
So just kind of going back to the Blue Skies research piece, over the last decade, if not a bit longer, there's been more of a push towards universities working with industry or commercialising their research. And I guess I've got two questions. One question is that potentially going to hamper blue sky research, where sometimes it's not obvious what the outcomes are? Speaking as a particle physics background, when people started doing that sort of thing, it wasn't necessarily obvious. The internet might happen, or cancer treatments and proton therapy and all sorts of these sorts of things. And the other side is, if you're working with an industry partner, or working from industry, have you found that, yes, I would like to do this particular thing, I like to answer this question, but I've had to kind of narrow the scope so it would fit into a particular box that would work, could be commercialised, and I guess my concern is, are we hampering something that the universities do well to ensure that we end up doing things in a more commercial fashion, and how can we prevent that?
So I think you're asking. I think you're asking then. Does the lure of filthy lucre perhaps narrow our field of blue sky research, perhaps in some way. So, panel, does anyone want to have a crack at that one?
Any philosophy majors? Or?
No? Does anyone in the audience want to have an opinion on the balance between true blue sky research and that thing which someone somewhere might think would be useful? When if you focus a bit more down here, you'll get more money. Anyone? I mean, so we could perhaps sort of take the commercial element out of it, and perhaps some blue sky research ends up being more focused on where the next grant's coming from. I mean, it's a similar type of thing. Did we have someone who wanted to? Peter.
Warning of incoming cynicism.
Stand up. Be cynical standing up, please.
The student, the teaching side of the university is becoming increasingly commercial, right? We pretend that it's not, but it really is. As central funding decreases and students are increasingly paying more and more of their teaching, that side is becoming more effectively commercial, whereas the research side is not to that extent yet. Is it going that way? Is that going to be something of the future?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, we're seeing, I suppose, the variety of funding available is getting wider, and industry is providing more of it than perhaps ever before. And also charitable bodies who, of course, need to follow their quite focused paths as well. So I think this is a similar question. I think these two questions are interlinked. There's blue sky research, and there's research which could be, should we say, influenced by the money.
I think there's definitely more and more of the money towards research is towards something that has to be at least applied or commercialized at some point. As you said, most of the money in the UK R&D comes from the business sector, and I'm sure universities, do try to build those relationships so they're getting a lot of that money, or at least some of it. But even if you just look at the major public purse, Innovate UK's funding allocation this year is almost as big as all the disciplinary councils. That's a very big difference than 5 years ago. So I think it is commercializing. I don't know if that's in the way that was presented it, that maybe it's tainting those who used to do or want to do blue sky thinking. I have less of an opinion on that, but I think there's more and more money for commercializable research. And I'm not sure if there's more and more money for just basic research.
Be interesting to know what the implication of that changes on us as DRI professionals. So we haven't done we've done a vanishingly small amount of commercial work at Manchester, and that's mainly been because we've never had a big enough team, even though it's quite a big team, we've never had a big enough team that we can satisfy all the demand coming from within the university itself anyway. So before we get into doing pure commercial work, but we are doing more and more work which is funded by commerce through researchers at the university. So does anyone have any thoughts on it's a bit of an open-ended question, do anyone have any thoughts on that impact on us as DRI professionals? Philip?
We're potentially about to start grappling with this in one particular case, and I think the obvious first thing that springs to mind is then a different set of expectations. If it's a commercial offering or you're providing commercial software, so expectations of bug fixes or response to service requests, that again, what happens, what's the sustainability of this after the initial funding has run out to deliver X piece of software and it's handed over? How is that managed? And as soon as it's a commercial arrangement, it's different to an internal academic one, although there's obviously all the issues we've talked about of expectations of why won't you keep hosting my website or whatever, but it becomes a different shift, and so I feel like we need things writing in clearly from the outset of what the expectations are and what can be delivered, so that we're not turning into a 24-hour help desk for a bit of software that we've written. But equally as well, I think there's then different models of if it is something that's commercial and ongoing and longer term, then you can actually then build in that ongoing finance to do that ongoing maintenance and adding new features. So it does also provide some benefits potentially, but I think as it's a new way of working, it's something else to kind of factor in and not just run into head first, but yeah, try and foresee as many of these issues as possible.
I think there's an element of managing expectations as well, that if you build something with the expectation that it's for a 6-month research project, then you probably haven't built it in a way that is robust enough to kind of hit that industry market. But then someone from the outside will see your product and they'll press the button and it works and it comes out, and you don't understand all of the things that's going on underneath. Yeah. So it's making sure that once that product is being built and is out there, that there's the awareness of its limitations.
Yeah, and the fact that, I've seen it many times over the years, you build that thing in 6 months, underneath it's all spit and sawdust and a bit of pearl, and it looks really slick, and you do it, you go and you show it at conferences and you do demos and people, this is amazing, we want this, where do we download it? And then you go, no, you can't, it's not ready yet. So yeah, it's a really difficult balance, because you've got to publicise your, in our world, you've got to publicise your work, which then opens it up to people expecting more of it than perhaps there is. Yeah.
I don't have an answer for this, but maybe it's like a question maybe people in the audience want to feedback, because it doesn't sound like the DRI or the RC professionals in particular are getting this hard pressure of commercialization a lot, although, as you said, some of the products will go out there. But I would imagine that within universities there is pressure somewhere. Yeah. I'm sure other institutions look at Manchester and say, weren't you lucky to find graphene? And you've got a lot of money now, and that pressure then applied on researchers. Or there's a lot of emphasis on the startup scale up out of institutions, and that's some other variation of putting some sort of restrictions and pressures on those who end up producing those things through the conventional teaching and research activity.
Yeah, I think the pressure will rise because it's something which researchers and universities are now graded on. The knowledge.
Knowledge exchange.
Yeah, that's the one. It's the other F, isn't it?
Yeah.
F. Knowledge exchange framework. Any other questions from the audience? Dave.
I'm not sure who was in first. I could give you, I'll ask a question later, I can give you a good example of something that industry wants that we've provided and got significant commercial income from for decades, and that's protein crystallography, CCP4 and the synchrotrons. Part of the reason for that was academics former academics, students, postdocs, whatever, who moved into industry and were then kindly disposed towards us, like in CCP4 in particular. I don't know whether things are significantly different these days, but we had competing pharmaceuticals taking data at the SRS who kind of knew that their competitors' data were there and not exactly well tied down, and were reasonably happy with that. It probably doesn't happen these days, but it was interesting at the time, and we worked with them and they understood us. But kind of related to that, if you're promising industry that their data are completely secure against the organisation, how do you do that? Because I'm not convinced it's possible.
How do we make sure that data is secure in the ways that industry wants it to be secure? Is it possible? Does anyone want to step forward on that one?
I think that probably links again to this kind of idea of standards or expectations, that if that's kind of discussed at the bid station at the start as something that's important, then you can budget in for the DRI professionals that have those skill sets and make sure that is in that product. But if that isn't thought about at the start, then you are taking a big risk.
I mean, it's all about changing what you do a bit as you're extending your audience here. So Daphne, the Daphne experience is probably a good example of where you're tinkering around the edges to try to start collecting data and start understanding yourselves in ways that you didn't have to when you were just thinking about your academic audience. I mean, we could be getting into a situation where you have to be careful what you wish for. That if we're really trying to covet industry and then trying to build in all these security protocols or other elements of it, at some point you probably could meet all those if you entirely change your culture and your way of working. Is that really what the sector wants to do?
Yeah, so it's actually quite interesting. We had a project who came to Daphne and they wanted to do some things, but they wanted their data held securely, and in the end using the Daphne hardware, we just built them we had some like data security experts, and just on our hardware we ended up building them just a completely new system that had sort of the functionality of like our like sort of workflow abilities, but with that data security. And in the end, it just ended up as something that we had to have completely separate because we couldn't build it into what we already had, and obviously that like all the people who had to work on that were taken away from like working on our. But it's a big step if it's not something you've built in from the start.
And doesn't feel scalable either.
No.
So if 10 industries came along and said, do what you did for them, then scaling is difficult.
We want what those other people have, and we just have to keep being like, no, that just isn't available. We're sorry, like we just can't do it.
Yeah. One last question.
So not a question, but so much as picking up a point that was made a few minutes ago. You're talking about the commercial pressures on DRI professional staff within the universities, and you don't feel that too much yet. Be aware that there are those pressures on the academics. And so there's this thing we've all heard of called REF, and as part of REF, 1 in every 10 academics in your department have to produce an impact case study. You have to demonstrate the impact of your research on society. It doesn't have to be necessarily in dollars, but in terms of a societal impact outside of pure academia. And these kind of pressures at the top level with government institutes like REF, initiatives like REF, are coming down on the universities, and there's so much money associated with that. Universities are responding in different ways with things like at our own place, business engagement chairs, to have a whole new round of professorial appointments for people whom business engagement is a major part of their activity. It doesn't apply to everybody. You can choose to play the game or not, but there are those things coming down from on high on the universities, and it will impact everybody sooner or later.
Yeah. We are starting to see it in Manchester, and some of that is taking, let's say, software, for ease of example, taking a piece of software from the research space into the packaged space, maybe not the commercial space, but at least something that is then usable by other people because you can show impact, and it is those drivers. I agree. Anyone else seeing that?
Yeah, at York we have a software commercialisation officer within the kind of commercialisation team. So just the fact that role exists is a kind of clear indication, and I think it's the kind of opening up of new income streams, I guess, is the bingo buzzwords to say that it's the decrease in overseas students, lack of central funding, so it's where are we going to get money from, and this is a kind of obvious route to to go. So yeah, there's money being put into these roles and positions, and internal funding as well for kind of I forget what it's, basically business engagement, pots of money that roles can
transfer, that sort of thing.
BIEI, I forget what it stands for. Is it business?
Business Engagement Initiative.
Yeah, Business Engagement Initiative. So it's a very big push, which I am actually funded through on one of those for partly. So it is like helping, money is being funneled from those into professional services RSE support. So it's not kind of, all bad news. We can and are being involved in those conversations as well, those processes.
So we need bigger teams, right?
Yeah, more people.
That's the message.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at time, and I'm conscious that we're between you all and the next session, which is loosely termed something like networking, but I believe is generally considered to be hosted in the bar area down there, and so on. So rather than that, I'd just like to say, I've got a couple of notices, but I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panel. I think everyone here on the panel has stepped in. So thank you ever so much, the panel. If you'd like to...